Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I want to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Best Practices for Setting Up Projects in SignAgent. I'm James Bosma, Vice President of Marketing here at SignAgent. We're thrilled to have so many of you joining us today to learn more about how you can maximize your use of the SignAgent platform right from the get-go. So we've got a healthy mix of wayfinding designers, fabricators, and facility managers on today's call, as well as people still considering joining the SignAgent community. We plan to offer some valuable guidance for all of you over the next 45 minutes or so. And as usual, before we start today's presentation, I want to cover some simple logistics. First of all, if you're interested in more information about any of the slides that we included in our pre-webinar slides, we have added the links to the chat, and we'll also provide them in a follow-up email after the webinar, along with a link to the webinar recording. At the end of the webinar, you will be prompted to fill out a very brief post-webinar survey, so please do take a few moments to complete that, as it helps us with future webinar programming. And speaking of surveys, you may have noticed in the pre-webinar slides that our annual customer survey will be distributed soon. So if you're a SignAgent customer, please keep your eyes open for that on your inbox, and please do take a few minutes to provide your feedback when you receive it. Finally, just want to let you know that chat will be disabled during the webinar. If you do have questions, please enter them using Zoom's Q&A tool. If your questions are simple, we'll do our best to answer them during the webinar. If they're more in-depth, we'll save them until the end for Alex and David to address them. And if we can't get to them during the session, we'll make note of your questions and share them with you through our follow-up email as well. So now on to the webinar itself. Our presenters today are Alex Keene and David Bottoni. Alex Keene is our Director of Customer Success. Alex handles a lot of our new customer onboarding. And as the face and voice behind our support and training videos, Alex will not be a stranger to most of you. One interesting note about Alex is that he was recently married, and he'll be taking some well-earned time off later this month to honeymoon in New Zealand with his partner. Alex's co-presenter today is David Bottoni. David is our Senior Director of Projects here at SignAgent. David's father ran a sign shop, so David has literally spent most of his lifetime in and around signage and wayfinding services. David has a wide range of experience with a deep understanding of project management, production processes, and implementation. And one interesting thing to share about David is that he's also a gifted artist, and all the artwork in his home, including the painting above his left shoulder there, is either his own or photographs that he's taken. So Alex and David will take over from here, and they'll also close out the webinar at the end. So just a last thank you from me and the rest of the staff here at SignAgent for joining us today. And over to you, Alex and David.
Right. So thanks, James, and thanks everybody who is on the call. Looking at the group of us, we've got a pretty wide range of experience, right from folks who are considering joining SignAgent all the way up to seasoned pros. So we're going to do our best to include something for all of you. We're going to be starting with the basics of what a project is, when we want to use states, and then we're going to get into some of the more complicated aspects of setting up multiple projects within organizations, including multiple teams on those projects, and finally talking about managing your signage over the long term. So even if you are like a designer who doesn't do long-term management, I would suggest sticking around, because the folks that do are your clients, and setting up your work so that it is easier for them to navigate and gets more value for them makes your work better and makes it easier for them to collaborate with you. And if you are brand new, don't worry, some of this is going to go over your head, but as James mentioned, it is being recorded. So by the time you spend some time with our sales and onboarding teams, it'll make a lot more sense and hopefully provide you some value. So quick reminder that we will follow up with links to some of the things that I'm going to talk about pretty quickly here into our support pages that will explain it in more depth if you are, again, new and don't know about some of these processes. So with that said, let's dive into things. So let's talk about what a project is. In this short version, it is basically a way to track your workflow. So you can see here on our home dashboard that we have a list of all of the projects that we're connected to. And there are a couple of things that make a project and really define it. And the first of those is having discrete steps, or as we call them, states. These are the steps that we're going to go through for either this project or any, and you can see that they're different depending on what we're doing and what we're working on. Another key element is that they are temporary. Signs are designed to move through a project, and they have a start date and an end date for the project as a whole, but also we can track for individual states to find out where things are being held up, where we're over time on certain elements. And then finally, they have a defined scope. So if I come into one of my projects here, I'm just going to view the overview, and this is the scope of the project. We have a budget. We know how many signs we're going to be working on. We have an overview of where our signs are sitting currently, and again, where the holdups can be, as well as that same view over time so that we can see the burn up. So with those elements in mind, let's talk about how we go about setting this up. And we'll start with the states. So if I come over to the left-hand sidebar here, we have one project called construction. And the states for this one are pretty generic, but these are the ones that we recommend that you at least start with. So what they do is, in combination with the other visibility filters here, they give us a way to really drill down into what's going on in our projects. So if I want to look at all of the room IDs on floor 2 that are currently being programmed, I can do that really quickly. Again, it's just a way to track where things are in the process and who is looking at them. All right. So the next question is, A, is Alex Canadian? Because he said process, yes. And B, why did we choose these states? And the real indication of when you should have a new state is when there is a handoff of responsibility. The person who is on site doing the surveying is very probably not going to be the same person who's doing the programming, is not going to be the same person who's doing the review of that, of the artwork. Even if they are, they're not going to be doing them at the same time. When we shift gears from working in one spot or with one person to another is when it's a good time to have a state change as well, so that we can really track as signs move across from that one state to another. Now, that being said, you may not have a need for all of these states. Let's say you're just doing a small percentage of this project. You won't need the production, installation, and completion. Or let's say that you're working on a larger project that is a lot more complicated. You might want to track this in a lot more depth. This is just a good starting point. And to talk a little more about that, I'm going to hand that over to Dave.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So Alex mentioned these are all states. You might consider them milestones. You might consider them scopes of work. These are the generic, basic chronological order in which the life of a sign would live. Survey may or may not exist in any of your projects, especially if you have a new project. You may start initially with just new floor plans and start programming right away. So what you want to do is hit all those milestones and create, deadlines and dates that you can enter into each project state. So you're going to manage this from the get-go. What you want to also do is kind of build it out so you can see the steps in which you can have the signage begin, get reviewed, approved, and move on to the next step. So you can create multiple states or steps in that project, either on its own, like you have here chronologically. So you have the one project, 112 street construction, and you have a number of states below that. You can also create a project in and of itself. A survey could be a project in and of itself inside that other project. So you can assign those to other contractors or to a team. So in some cases, you have designers on the call here now that may only be concerned with the survey programming and handoff after review for quoting or tender production. And then you may have design builders that take it from the beginning right till the end. You also have production teams and vendors and installers that may do a very limited scope of work And Alex will explain how you can, have multiple vendors and stakeholders working on one project by divvying that up into multiple projects inside of that. So that'll come later. But it's important to have everything there for transparency. A lot of SignAgent users are also facility owners, so they want to see the entirety of the project from beginning to end. And it's good to have it there from the designer's perspective, from the builder's perspective as well. So you can track the project through reports or just through visibility here. I suggest doing this just from a perspective of understanding where the project is at and who's involved. So I think it's best to keep track of this, as Alex mentioned, keep it up to date. The locations and sign types can live in any of these sign types, and you use the filtering option to see, very specific focused on signs or locations. But in essence, the project management lives in the project section. So I'll hand it back to Alex so he can explain how to set that up properly, how to monitor it, and make the best out of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. So we've talked about setting up one project. Let's talk about moving on to multiple. So if you are in the design build space, you'll know about the general rule is that we have one client to one organization. And within that, we can do multiple things of work for that same client. We can have multiple projects. If you're managing your own signage, there's only going to be one organization that you work out of, and your projects are going to be more numerous and more nuanced. Now, there's some real advantages to that. There are some rare exemptions, but keeping multiple projects in that one organization means that we keep all of our info together. And it also allows us to make broader changes as well as build upon the past work that we've done. This, again, makes the data more useful to kind of all stakeholders at each stage of the process, rather than having it divided up and separated. So let's take a look at this new construction here. We've got the new construction and rebrand, and they could be happening simultaneously, or they could be staggered, or even barely overlapping. Now, what we'll see is that if I turn off the rebrand, all of the 112 signs are going to be concentrated in the 112 Way Street locations. So this project is totally tied to this one location and this particular building. On the other hand, the rebrand, you'll see, has signs that occur in both. And this is a very realistic situation where we're going to have projects that affect multiple locations, and also locations that have multiple projects going on in them. So there's a lot of moving pieces to this, and it means a couple of things. We're going to have to do some work to make sure that people who are working on one project or another don't cross paths and don't interfere with each other's work. But also we'll have to make sure that we can really easily separate this. So if we were to, for example, take the location structure here where we just have 112 Way Street and 113 Finding Street, and we were to divide up the projects like that, we would lose the ability to have a rebrand project that stretches across both, because now where do we put that information? So we have projects as their own thing, locations as their own thing, and the two aren't necessarily connected. And if that doesn't make a ton of sense, don't worry about it. We're going to be coming back to that because it makes more impact when we start talking about larger organizations where we're managing projects on an ongoing basis. Okay, so let's talk about the permissions and how we stop people from essentially tripping over each other. So as an admin of this organization, I have access to everything. I can see the rebrand, the 112 construction. I can see all of the signs that are going to be created here. But what we want to do is limit the permissions for someone who's coming in to just work on this 112 construction project. And the way that we do that is we're going to edit it, and we're going to add them as a member. So I'm going to take this and add my own email. I'm going to go through the worry of trying to spell in front of a bunch of people, and I can add myself as a member. So this login now is only going to see the signs that are allocated to this project. there will be 113 signs when they log in. They won't even see that the rebrand exists. They don't need to know about it. It's not in their purview. They don't need to be concerned. And that's really what we do to prevent people from mistakenly working on the wrong data, as well as it makes it a lot easier for them when they jump in and they know that everything they see is going to be relevant to what they're doing. Now, let's take that one step further, because as we said, 112 construction only is being worked on for the 112 Way Street location. And that's where we use mandates. Mandates are basically a way to control which sign types and locations someone who is accessing this project can see. So if I turn this on, I can now come to the locations and say, which ones do I want them to have access to? I want them to have access to the 112 Way Street, but I don't care about them seeing 113. I can do the same thing with sign types as necessary. And now when they log in, again, the only thing that Alex Plus member account is going to see is the information that's pertinent to them. They see the project, they see the location that they need. Now, let's take this again just one step further and talk about like installers or reviewers or surveyors. They're doing a very specific task, and especially the folks who are going to be on site using the mobile app, we want to make it super simple for them. The process of being on site is confusing enough. We don't need to add extra data for them. So what we're going to do is invite them in at a state level. It's very similar where we're going to edit and we're going to add them in as a permission at this level here. So this is especially important for installers. This is because we don't want to make them sort through that data, as I said, but also all of this extra sign data is unneeded and extra data that they now have to sync and have stored locally on their device. So especially as we get into large projects with thousands of signs, that becomes a lot of extra information. Ideally, an installer would never have access to more than one state at a time. We would invite them to this one, they would do the work, we'd uninvite them and invite them to the next thing that they're going to be working on so that we know that everything they have is completely pertinent to them. Okay, so that's multiple people working in a project. Let's talk about multiple groups, multiple companies, different vendors working all in the same project. So what we can see here is that we have set this up where rebrand is actually a new folder rather than a new project. And that rebrand houses 4 separate projects. The reason that we're doing this is so that we can use those same permissions to really isolate what they're going to be working on. It both controls their access and allows the third party to create whatever steps are relevant to them without needing consensus from multiple parties. So for example, if I'm working on the survey team, I'm going to see only the signs that are here. I can create my own steps and states if I want, but I don't have to worry or don't see what's going on with programming, or maybe our production team wants to create 15 steps. We can let them because it doesn't influence anyone else. We're really tightly controlling what they have access to. Now, the thing about more control means that there is more responsibility as someone with full administrative access. If I'm coming in here, there's a couple of limitations that we should know about for members of projects. The first is that they can't update or create new locations. This is just because, as I was saying earlier, a location can have multiple projects associated with it. And so if I only see the information from one project, I could make an update that influences another person's project without realizing it. So we need someone from that admin level to come in and be able to sign off on making those updates. The other part about this is when we're using this style here, where there's a project for the survey team, there's a project for programmers, they don't have the ability to remove signs and move them from one state to the next when it crosses that project boundary. And so that's something that I'm going to have to do. As an admin, if my team whose programming is done and ready and they have 18 signs that have been reviewed, I'm going to be the one who's responsible for coming in, finding all the approved signs, and moving them on to the next state in production. So again, having that tighter control really means that I am the one who has to be doing some of this editing because I haven't given that control over to the team. So again, more control means more responsibility. All right. So speaking of more control and responsibility, let's talk about moving on to managing our signs long-term. So if I come over to this organization here, there are some different things that we have to worry about when we're not just looking at a project that maybe would run a couple months to maybe a year, maybe 2 years, but we're looking at long-term management of 5, 10 plus years, where this organization is going to continue to be a living and breathing document. So the most important distinction that we have is that we're going to have a lot of projects that complete here. And so under our projects, we've got 2 folders, and they are divvied up into the active projects and then the completed ones. So there's actually only one project incomplete. It's the signs that are on the wall and installed. This is everything that is done. It's installed. We're not worrying about it or working on it right now, but we still need access to that data. This is where managing your own signs becomes very helpful, is I get to come in and say, if I were to change the name of a department, how many signs does that affect? It also lets me do things like forecasting and budgeting. If I know that I have an estimated lifespan of 5 years for signs in a high traffic area, how many signs does that affect? What kind are they? And how much budget do I need to set aside every year from now until then to pay for the project, rather than just trying to come up with that budget once it's already an issue? So everything that's installed, completed, that's going to live in that complete folder here. Let's move into the active. There are 3 ways that we break this down, and you don't have to follow these exact breakdowns, but it's what we've found has worked best for people who are doing long-term management. So the first is maintenance. This is for all the 1 and 2 off signs where we just need to produce one in our internal sign shop or with our close vendor, get it installed up on the wall. It's not worth its own POs and projects. And so we have maintenance that is essentially here just to capture the information so we can still have it flow through that workflow and then dump back into the completed here once it's done. So this process is the same, and signs are going to move through it at a very different rate because they're all moving at kind of their own individual pace. The next folder that we've got is the internal projects. And these are all of the ones that we're taking care of completely in-house. So I've got a rebrand where we are using our own team and our own sign shop. And at that point, everything lives in one project. Project is rebrand. It's all us, so it all lives in here. We oversee the whole thing. It's only our team that has access to this. On the other hand, when we bring in external vendors or third-party consultants, we want to have those projects separated off on their own. Again, both so that we can keep track of them, who has responsibility, but also so that we can give them the access that they need. So if we have one team working on this survey design, here are the quick steps for that. Here are the production and install. Let's look at new build 2. This is a totally separate project, and it follows the same outline that we were talking about earlier, where we have multiple people coming in, and the surveyors are separate from the designers, are separate from the build and install folks. So again, it lets us have their own designated workspace. They have their own workflow that they can care about, and it keeps things separate for us. So it's a really great way to manage exactly who's working on what, where any delays might be, where we're seeing issues, and which signs have been essentially handed off from one team to another. So this is why we want to have this idea of who exactly is working on it. When I talked earlier about just organizing our plans by the location, or organizing our project by the location that they happen in, this is what we miss out on. We lose the ability to say that my vendor 2 is currently designing for these different projects, and we lose the ability to really have that granular, tight look at things. The other thing that we have to worry about here is how this is sustainable. Right now, this is already a lot to look through, and I don't have 30 completed projects that are cluttering this up. So let's talk about how to create a new one of these, but also how to close them out, because that's going to be really important as we move into the multi-year management of these signs. We don't want to have a bunch of dead information floating around. So we're going to look at webinar project. I've pre-created it here, and we're going to move some signs into it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is only look at my completed signs. These are not part of an existing project, and so we're free to move them up into the webinar so that we can start working on them. So let's narrow this down to something pretty narrow here. Let's take that, and we will do just our directional signs. So directional signs for, there we go. We'll just do floor 10. This is a really small example, but we're doing it live, so we don't want to be waiting for the system to move a bunch of data. So I'm going to take all 10 of these signs, and I know that I no longer want them to be in the installed project. I want them to move up into, in this case, it's stage 1 of our webinar project. There we go. So when I move those over, now the people that we've invited as members of this project now have access to these signs. They can make changes, they can do updates, and they're only going to see those signs. So let's turn those on there. So they do the work. It goes through the process. In this case, it's a really simple 2-step process. And we're going to move them from stage 1 to stage 2, and it's completed. Great. So what we're going to do is basically close out this project. And again, we don't want to just leave them here in stage 2. Once something's complete, we want it to move back to this folder. Now, a lot of people are often concerned about, well, how do we make sure that I can find these? I need to know that we worked on these 10 signs together. What was the scope of this project? For that, what we're going to do is move down to the tags for this. And we can tag it with a PO, a job number, whatever we want. And now all of those signs are related to each other. We have a searchable term that we can find which ones they were a part of, or if there's a specific sign we're looking at, we can see which other ones were included in that project. So I will tag that with the job number, and I'm ready to wrap this. So I am going to move this down to the on the wall installed, save those 10 signs. And as soon as they've moved on from this project, I'm now free to delete this project. It is now essentially junk data. It was as I said, projects are temporary. We want the signs to move through them. We want them to stop existing eventually. So I would come in and delete that. And now those signs are back in our completed, and we know exactly what the history was. We can see when they were moved, who did this, and what stages they've moved through. Okay. So the thing that we would suggest about this, and it's one of the takeaways, that if you are managing your signs on an ongoing basis, is that we want to stay on top of this, right? This was a relatively quick process. It's a little longer if we're moving, 1,000 signs, but not much longer. If we don't stay on top of it, the more out of sync with the real world we get, and the longer it takes to sort through all this data. It's basically a larger task, because now I have to say, well, which projects have wrapped? Which ones haven't? Are all the signs in them still there? Are they completed? What's the status of them? And now I have a huge manual undertaking to re-clean up this data versus just taking some time to do it when the actual processes happen. Keeps things way cleaner, way smoother for you, and you'll thank yourself in the future. So with that being said, it means that if I'm an admin, whether it's on a one project organization, a multi-project organization, or a more complex one where we're actively managing signs, I need to not necessarily know all the details, but there needs to be a system in place that I understand. So that was a lot of information that I just threw at you. I would say that the 3 key takeaways from this are that we want to create a reasonably standardized workflow that we can use to track all of our signs and states. And we want to utilize those states to keep us organized. 2 is we want to keep access relevant. We don't want extraneous data because that opens up room for mistakes. And if we have multiple teams working on projects, or if we have someone who's just doing a survey, we want to make sure that they only have the data that they need. And then finally, we want to make sure that if we are doing ongoing sign management, we want to be organized and we want to be up to date. It'll make you more efficient and make any kind of budgeting and forecasting a dream for you. So that's the content that we're going to go through here today. I really appreciate everybody's time, and we're going to open up to some more questions here. All right. So Larissa, have we had any that need some explanation? I see that there's at least one talking about linear states. That's a really great question of whether signs are always, let's move to one of the easier ones here, whether signs always move from one to the other to the next. And if we find that we're skipping states, that's a good sign that we actually have two projects. States are typically, I don't want to say always, but they are typically linear. We want each sign to hit each part of this process. If we had a phase 1 and phase 2, where we're running phase 1 through these states and phase 2 through these states, that's really where we want to break those apart into two projects, because it is ideally going to be a linear flow. All right. Any other questions so far?
I think there's the question regarding the survey. I guess it's also a question of taking an existing building and you do a survey, so you have 1,000 signs and they're going to be in different statuses in terms of old versus new versus damaged. I think the purpose of the survey first is to get that data in there and understand where they should exist in a different state. So some of them might be perfect and they're complete, and those are the ones that can move straight to complete and installed. The other ones that need to be addressed may have to go into a design or programming state or review. And then the question is whether they're not going to be replaced. You may look at everything and say it's a mix of both old and new, but we're going to keep everything. The ones that are new, you can keep it as complete and installed. The ones that are old but are not going to be replaced should be tagged. At that point, then it becomes a question of what operations you'd like to do with some of those signs. The ones that are damaged or missing would go back into an earlier state, which would need to be designed, produced, and installed. I'm not sure if that helps, but I'm trying to keep things in a chronological order and how you can at least identify the signs through a survey and where they belong in a state.
Excellent. I see there was another question about moving a group of signs to a new state. So there's a couple of ways that we can select multiple signs within SignAgent. And again, what we want to do is really narrow down with our visibility filters to the signs that we're going to work with. So let's say that we're looking at just floor 2 and 3 here. Rather than have this extra data, I would want to come in and make sure that when we're looking at this, we're only looking at floor 2 and 3 so that we have this narrowed idea of what we're trying to edit. Now, the first way applies to one floor at a time, and it's location-based. So if I hold the Shift key and click and drag a box around the signs here, we're going to see that I'm editing 6 of them at one time. I'm then free to move them as a group into other states. The other way that we can do this is from the sidebar here. When we spread across multiple floors, is I can click on one, hold Shift again, click on the other one, and it will select everything in between for me. So now, again, the same thing. I can move those as a group from one state to another. All right, what else have we got here? Oh, that's a great question around salvaged and surveying. So having a state for salvaged is a good idea. When we're working in a project as a part of the recommended states, one of the other ones that we'll do is include deleted signs. So if I have a new state and I have it as deleted, it just future-proofs things for me. Where if I take this, let's take just one sign here, and as a part of this, we often want to do an override so that everything in this state is one very visible color. Let's do just black so that it stands out. So you can see we have this deleted at the bottom here. Now, if I have a sign that I know, is determined to be not needed anymore, I move that into deleted, and we'll see that it's actually going to go black to show me, hey, this has been deleted. This future-proofs us against later coming back and being like, oh, you know what? We actually did need that sign. You don't have to recreate it. All we do is we move it out of the deleted folder back into the regular workflow, and we're ready to keep going. All right.
I think we skipped a question here from Ken.
Okay.
I was copying a set of signs from the survey to the next programming phase.
Oh, okay. So the fact that it is adjusted, that it's tracked in the history to, let's see, well, there we go. Alex webinar change state from to deleted, and we can show the difference of that has been moved. Now, when we move a sign, we want that history to be a part of it. What we don't necessarily want is to copy signs from one state to another. So we don't necessarily want to keep a record in, for example, if we're moving this sign, we don't want to move these signs and as a clone and copy them into programming, because now we're working with duplicates. Each sign has its own history. And so we don't necessarily want to say that there's two versions of the sign, one in survey, one in programming. We actually want it to move through the process. We can add tags and other detail fields to track when it was moved, to be able to sort for them as a group. However, we don't want duplicates in our project. It just opens up a lot of potential mistakes and human error, especially as we start dealing with larger projects. All right, so is it possible to flag a group of temporary signs with exact date for removal? Yeah, and that's something that we would do for states as well. So instead of deleted, let's just rework with this, and we're going to call it, that it's going to be removed. What we would do is we would flag a specific date that we want those signs removed for. And anything that we put into here for like a temporary sign, once it's installed and up on the wall, this technically comes before completed, where we have all our temporary signs and they're going to hit this removed state and they're going to drop out of the workflow. When we hit that date, we come in, I guess there's only one right here, but we select all of them, we delete those signs, and they never make it to the completed end of that workflow.